I've got that. Thank you very much. So where are we now then? So it's been cancelled. Does that mean the deal has just been scrapped for good? I've just seen Boris Johnson.
You're in an area of confusion now, because of course the Americans have walked out and they've said that sanctions. The other crucial part of the deal was, of course, that sanctions on Iran were lifted in a whole raft of areas, which meant that trade could recommence in those areas. Now, by the US walking out, what it means is, firstly, you don't have agreement internationally anymore on the Iranian nuclear program, number one. But number two, it means they've already said that sanctions will re-emerge in a few months' time. And that becomes significant because it means that if we start trading or keep on trading with Iran, we will fall foul of what is called secondary sanctions. The Americans have a particular process which says any country assisting a country they've got sanctions on is deemed to be in violation of those sanctions, any company. And as such, that company will be sanctioned by the Americans.
It's a bit of a bullish tactic, isn't it?
Well, it is a bullish tactic, but if you want sanctions to work, it sort of has a value in that it makes sanctions relevant. Otherwise, you end up with sanctions not working. I mean, if you look at the history of sanctions throughout the ages, they tend not to work if they're unilateral sanctions. But the Americans have the power to sort of make other people sort of fall in line with them because of the power of their economy. Everyone wants to trade with the US, particularly, and of course, we want to trade with the US post-Brexit, don't we? So there's this sort of big question for what we do. So the Americans walk out. We're saying we're going to keep the deal going. It's frankly not possible to keep the deal going and stay friends with the US and not be sanctioned by the US. So we have to make a decision as to what we intend to do.
Dr. Allen, why are nuclear programmes needed for countries?
Well, this is another very good point. So countries may argue that they want civilian nuclear power. So you'll know that nuclear power is a source of electricity and other forms of energy, and that they want to have that capability. But you'll probably also know that the Israelis last week revealed this massive trove of documents that they managed to get out of Iran, which stated that actually, contrary to what Iran had said prior to 2015, that it claimed it was a sort of a peaceful process, actually they were always developing a military nuclear capability, which is, of course, the other reason. So it's quite clear that prior to 2015, the Iranians were developing nuclear weapons, not just a civilian program. And that is, of course, the bit that we don't want.
Yeah, cool.
Right, OK. So in your God, blimey, it's a lot to take in. So what are your think tank thinking then about where are we heading? Where are we going to be in 6 months' time?
Well, I think realistically, we have to head to if the Europeans wish to salvage anything from this process, they're going to have to come up with some form of sort of negotiation with Iran that will allay American concerns. That means that they'd have to come back to the Americans and say, OK, you've kind of given us this 6-month period when you're withdrawing and you're sort of, you're putting sanctions on us slowly, but you may do that yourself in a quicker way. Can we do anything to allay your concerns? And the sort of 3 or 4 areas that the Americans made clear they wanted progress on were the ballistic missiles, to stop testing on that, the full inspection of all sites in Iran at a moment's notice, essentially, and then, of course, also Iran stopping its support for terror overseas. And that'll, of course, be a very difficult one for the Iranians, given they've been engaged in so much overseas activity in the last few years. And finally, no sunset clause on the deal. This is it, Iran. If you want this deal to come back into the world economy, it's not a 10 or 15-year process. It's forever.
OK, and presumably Iran not particularly happy about what's happened.
Well, obviously not. I mean, their line is, well, we signed a deal. It doesn't matter if it's a bad deal. You signed the deal, which I think is frankly a poor argument, because we know throughout history, or even in our personal lives, sometimes we sign a contract which is daft and there is a way out of it. The way you tear it up and maybe you get a court or something along those lines, or you just renegotiate it, or you just say, we're not doing this anymore. Goodbye. Come and chase us if you want, which is essentially what the Americans have done. I think if the Iranians also have a choice, do they want to pursue their nuclear ambitions, or were they serious when they negotiated with us in 2015 and actually intend to end that nuclear weapons program forever? If that's the case, it should be a very easy decision to make. Surely the Iranians should simply be able to say, OK, we'll come back to the table, no nuclear program forever, and in exchange for coming back into the international economy in a full way. If that was a deal on the table, I think it'd be a very different argument in Washington.
So, and what about the European allies then? Are we all together as one? Is it us versus the US?
It's unclear where we're at exactly, because prior to this deal falling apart, President Macron had been in Washington, of course, and had suggested there was room for manoeuvre in some of the things that the Americans wanted in terms of missiles in particular, and a couple of other points now, and maybe even the sunset clause. So the Germans have been the strongest proponents of the original deal, and we have frankly stayed a little bit out of it, out of these sort of intricate discussions, although you did see Boris Johnson make a plea this week even on US TV to stay in the deal. But of course, we're a bit conflicted. We obviously want to show the Europeans we're still a good European ally, but we don't want to alienate the US given the Brexit context. So for us, it's a very tricky position indeed.
It certainly is. And you know what? You've explained that very, very well.
Brilliant.
Thank you very much for that. Dr. Alan Mendoza, founder of the Henry Jackson Society political think tank.